The incident covered in this video occurred on January 6, 2023. It is the incident that confirmed for me that I was correct about discrimination, though it would take me a month to come to terms with that. It is the incident that would eventually lead to my director's termination, though that would take 6 months. But it is also the incident I am most ashamed about how I initially handled it or how I initially responded. And I think it's important to cover all of those details, what happened and what I did. But before we get into what exactly happened, I want to start this video like I do all other videos, covering incidents that occurred that I won't be doing an entire video on, but that did happen between the last video and this one, as well as relevant details that are useful to understanding what happened. To begin, I did forget to cover last video that in October, my director changed my cadence on our one-on-ones to every other week. I didn't think much of it, but it wasn't until the role responsibility disparity, the escalation, and then being berated because I wasn't mature enough to handle additional responsibility that I realized only my cadence had been changed. My counterpart, the male who inherited the additional responsibility, continued to have a weekly one-on-one for 30 minutes, and my team lead actually continued to have a weekly one-on-one as well, but for an hour. Additionally, in December, we reviewed Glint survey results, which, if you're not familiar, is a tool that allows you to provide feedback anonymously, both in terms of ratings as well as comments. And during the review call, my director shared the comments as was standard in terms of like what comments had been received collectively as a department. But what stood out to me was that somebody had made a comment that the segment needed more diversity as well as more recognition. He proceeded to call out another male manager on the team and say, "Oh, I know who this is because I actually had a conversation with her at the recent offsite we had been at." And the concerns from this were really twofold for me. One of them was that there were only 2 women on this team, so there were only so many possibilities of who could have made these comments, and it was supposed to be anonymous. And he had said this in front of all of the leaders for the East and Central teams in his segment. But also, as somebody who had never really believed that any of this was actually anonymous, and I guess it stands for a reason that people are going to speculate, it basically confirmed for me that if I was ever going to add a comment to any of these things, I better be okay with the fact that they're going to guess that it's me, or at least speculate. Another thing that may not seem directly relevant to this, but does play a role in where my priorities are while this is all happening, is the fact that my pay was incorrect, and I learned about it on January 3rd, 2023. Now, without getting into all the details, I have previously mentioned that there were some pay issues that resulted in other team members leaving. Those issues had gone on for quite a bit of time the year prior, and most of us were fairly exhausted with dealing with any kind of commission issues. So I was a bit distraught to learn that I had been paid $40 when I should have received a couple $1,000s. And I am dealing with that at the time, and this was definitely a priority because of the fact that, to be honest, I was worried about layoffs coming and I wanted to get it corrected in case they did in February. And then most relevant to this video, on January 5th, 2023, I initiated a call with my director to apologize for my behavior in September and in November of the year prior. I knew, or I had recently learned, that a role change that I had thought might be a potential possibility for me to transition into internally was no longer going to be an option. And I knew that I either made it work with this director and make peace, or I wasn't going to be able to continue here. I wasn't going to be able to be successful. And at the end of the day, I still loved my job and I loved what I did, and I didn't want to lose that. On top of that, there were a lot of rumors, which turned out to be true, that layoffs were coming in February. And I was worried that I was going to be first on the chopping block because at this point it had been made very clear to me that my performance didn't matter, and that my director had far more power than anything my performance could overcome. So I apologized for escalating like I did, and for potentially hurting his reputation when he was just establishing those reputations, because if you haven't watched the previous videos, he had only started less than a year prior, especially in terms of escalating to our HR business partner and particularly our senior VP. And we smoothed it out. I wouldn't say that I got an apology back, but he did admit that he could have handled the situation differently. Now, keep in mind that I had been told it was going to be addressed by my VP who was managing or leading the segment at the time. But nothing ever came of it. So there was no response afterwards. So this is the first time we really had talked about it. That call got cut short because another individual on another manager's team suddenly departed the company. And that is important because it plays a role directly in what happens the next day. On January 6th, we had our scheduled one-on-one. When we got on, I don't remember how the call initiated, but I learned that an individual with the last name Ho had departed the company. Normally, I don't share personal relevant details, but there's no way to tell the story without telling you what his last name is. Because on that call, my director made a joke that he either thought I would find funny or he either thought I would find funny or I guess just simply wanted to see how I responded. But he said, he told me he had sent the other female manager who is also of Asian descent, a video that said no more hoes in New York City or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact words, but I do remember that it was an indication that he had sent her a video about no more hoes in New York City because this person lived in New York City. I don't remember how I responded, to be honest. It's possible I played it off. But I know I felt gross. And I know I felt shame. Shame because I couldn't do anything about it. And I knew it in that moment. All I could think of was that we had just settled everything the day before. And was I really going to explode all of that based on this comment, even though I knew in my heart, I knew how wrong it was. And so I can't tell you exactly how I responded on the call. I can only tell you that I distinctly remember what I felt like, and I can only tell you that I didn't tell anybody that I normally talk to about this stuff about it. And I look back now and I think the only thing I can think of is that I was ashamed initially because I wasn't going to do anything and I knew it. I did have a conversation with the manager who received the video a few days later, and I asked her if she had, and she confirmed. And in that video or in those messages, I'm even ashamed of how I responded because I even said like, yeah, he told me he sent you this video, and I asked her if she had received it, and she said yeah, she hadn't really looked at it. And then I asked her, I said, yeah, when he said it to me, I just couldn't believe like that he would take that risk. And I think I said something along the lines of like, don't be. I can't believe he was that stupid or something along those lines, because I think deep down, I was trying to say what I couldn't yet say out loud, which was like, this was something to do something about. And I knew it, and but I wasn't gonna, you know? So I was making a joke out of it or joke about it. And that's really it. That is what happened. There's not actually much to say beyond that, except because it's pretty straightforward. And so all there is to cover is why didn't I say anything? The only way I could come up with to start this last part of the video is to reference a quote from the movie She Said that's attributed to Rose McGowan that has stuck with me ever since the day I heard it. In that movie, she says, "It does damage to shout and no one listens." And this incident in particular speaks to the damage that was done. Not just in the fact that this had changed me fundamentally, because I was never the type of person who would laugh something like that off. I was never the type of person who would not say something, would not address this, especially the fact that this was not just sexist. this was also discriminatory in terms of racial discrimination. But the truth is that all I could think of was I finally had found peace, or found some resemblance of peace with this director. And no one cared. I mean, I had already given everyone plenty of evidence that things were off. No one cared before. Why would I think that they would care now? And then I guess I thought, well, if he is sexist and I'm the only person being hurt, maybe that's okay. And maybe I didn't think about it in those terms, but essentially I thought, yeah, I was right. But I'm not gonna be able to do anything about it. And so all I can keep doing is showing up and trying to be good and just hope that he leaves, or he gets moved to a new role, or I get moved to a new role. Because inevitably those things happen in business, right? Because the truth is, I was scared. I was scared of what this was gonna cost me. I was scared that no amount of work history, performance, or reputation building that I had done in the past was going to save me against somebody that was above me. And you go into survival mode. The fact of the matter is that I was defeated at this point. Most likely what would have happened is I would have stayed as long as I could have, and eventually I would have found another job and I would have left. I would have given up the career I loved because it wasn't worth the fight. And there are times where I wonder what my life would be like if I had done that. What if I had left before I realized I wasn't the only one who was going to be hurt by what was happening? Because in the next video is when I learned probably the most important lesson, which is that when somebody is discriminating, it is never just one person that will be hurt by it. And that's why fighting is so important.